Thanks very much. My name is Chris Edley. I'm the Dean of Boalt Hall Law School, and it's my privilege to welcome all of the participants in this terrific conference here to campus. I have a long list of people to thank, but I'll just thank the really important ones. There's the Global Commons project of the California Center for Environmental Law and Policy, or CCELP as we call it, at Boalt Hall. The Center for Environmental Public Policy at the Goldman School of Public Policy is a co-sponsor. The Berkeley Institute of the Environment is a co-sponsor. The American Society of International Law's International Environmental Law Interest Group is a co-sponsor. The Chancellor's Office of Governmental Affairs is a co-sponsor. So this really is a collaborative effort. Did all of these people contribute money to this enterprise? It's not bad. Anybody else want to co-sponsor? Okay. Since our principal co-sponsor, the Goldman School, since Michael Nacht, the dean of the Goldman School, couldn't be here, mostly because he doesn't care about this as much as I do. Let me just take a moment to advertise, if I might, a little bit of what this conference represents to us. With apologies to all of you who suffer on the disability of not being lawyers, I want to assert that in our view, lawyers are problem solvers, and that the best lawyers are needed to work on the hardest problems. But that also that the hardest problems are almost by nature challenges that require the integration of multiple disciplines and multiple professions. But we hope that as lawyers, one thing that we can bring to the exercise is the sharp pencil in the room, so that as the research demonstrates that something needs to be done, lawyers can bring to bear their skills to help engineer the appropriate policy responses based on not ideology, but on evidence. So what those of you who've been doing in this conference are engaged in is, in some ways, the sexy, cheap, easy, low-hanging fruit kind of part of the problem. That is to say, we have this strategy that you can be amused by getting together with lots of folks who aren't like you, so that engineers and climate scientists and lawyers and advocacy groups and so forth can be pulled together in a focused way to talk across the traditional lines that divide us, all towards better engagement, more successful engagement of our most difficult challenges. But in many respects, the hardest part is what happens after this conference is over. And so I would challenge all of you, but particularly those of you who work at Boalt, at CCELP, and at the Berkeley Institute on the Environment, I challenge you to think of where do we go from here at this conference, more than an important and interesting and engaging conversation, but how do we take the finest intellectual capital we can find and mobilize that to really have an impact on private practice and public policy? How do we be serious about the challenge of translating the work of the academy into a useful form for those like our honored guest at lunch today, who want us to really make a contribution? It's a singularly important challenge for a great public university, because if we don't work on these challenges, who will? Now, the Honorable Dianne Feinstein is a native of San Francisco, graduated from Stanford with a BA in history. She began serving on the San Francisco County Board of Supervisors in 1969, served indeed for 2.5 terms as president of that board, and went on to serve more than 8 years as the mayor of San Francisco. She became the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from California in 1992. As the senior senator from California, Senator Feinstein is the chair of the Rules and Administration Committee, which has jurisdiction over ethics, campaign reform, election reform, a few little problems like that. She also serves on the Senate Judiciary Committee, where she is the chairman of the Terrorism, Technology, and Homeland Security Subcommittee. She is not a lawyer, she just plays one on C-SPAN. Her voice has been critical in several battles over judicial nominations. She's a member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, but she's not allowed to talk to us about that. And she's a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee. This is a really important person, ladies and gentlemen. She is an appropriator. She serves on several subcommittees that will indeed be influential in future climate change policy. Chair of the subcommittee on the Interior Department and related agencies, among many others. Senator Feinstein's candidacy was endorsed in this last election by the League of Conservation Voters. But at the same time, she has reached out to representatives of industry to try to forge pragmatic consensus on critical environmental issues. In particular, given our purpose today, she proposes a mix of policy tools to prevent dangerous climate change. She's working on a package of 5 bills, including a cap-and-trade bill for electric utilities that was introduced this past January, a cap-and-trade bill affecting certain industrial sectors, a bill to increase fuel economy standards, another to promote low-carbon fuels, and an energy efficiency bill modeled after California's programs. So let me just say, the science is pretty clear. The risks are quite near. And the leadership is right here. Senator Feinstein.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
After the senator's finished her remarks, we expect to have time for a little bit of Q&A. You have, I think, a pen and a couple of 3x5 cards on your table. If you don't, it's because we don't want to hear from you. But somebody will come around to collect those while she's speaking, and then we'll have a Q&A session.
Well, thank you very much, Chris Edley. I must tell you, your reputation as a fine dean of a great law school for this non-lawyer precedes you, because I hear a lot about Boalt Hall from my position on the Judiciary Committee. It's great to be here today. This is actually the first time I have ever spoken at UC Berkeley. As you can see, I'm very much the big red. Now, the color isn't quite so bright because my husband is very active for the university and is here today properly in his blue. But I remember many, many years ago, I had a choice between Stanford and Berkeley, and I said to my father, who spent his life with this university, largely as a professor of surgery at the medical center and as an undergraduate here and in medical school in the university, said to me, "Dianne, you should know." I said, "Dad, you know, Cal is just so big. I want to go to a smaller school." And he said, "Remember one thing. It's better to sit 1,000 feet from a genius than 100 feet from a mediocrity." So that's how my father regarded this institution. Now, when I know that's true is when the Stanford band is on the field. But I understand that today you're having a great conference, and I think it's really very important that you do so, because this question that we're going to be discussing today is surprisingly large. Perhaps like me, some of you didn't know that global warming would be this much a major issue 20 or 30 years ago. I certainly didn't know that I'd be learning all about cap and trade, about gases that don't dissipate in the atmosphere, about amphibians like the golden toad of Costa Rica, which is disappearing from its rains forest. But the fact of the matter is that every day I learn more about what global warming is doing to our planet, and I become more convinced that the need to act is really now. Just last week, I learned that scientists have discovered a vast network of lakes buried under miles of ice in Antarctica. Some 145 of them have been documented so far, and more are being discovered all the time. One stretches for more than 100 square miles. Now, what's the significance? These lakes are believed to accelerate the flow of ice into the sea. And if massive ice sheets were to fall off the continent, it could mean a rise in sea level measured not in inches, but in feet. And this is just one of thousands of pictures being painted today by scientists measuring global warming. Disappearing rainforests, melting glaciers, crumbling and dying coral reefs. The world around us is truly changing. And if we do not slow these changes, it's going to have major consequences for our children and our grandchildren. So we have to open our eyes to the danger. We have to confront it, and we have to make major changes. Yet, there are still, believe it or not, some in this country who see profit in the status quo. There are some who seek to deny and debunk efforts to slow global warming. So this is a battle, and it must be fought. Let me begin with the good news. First, the recent shift of power in Washington opens the door to action, where that door was firmly shut before. My friend and colleague, Senator Barbara Boxer, is the new chairman of the Environment and Public Works Committee. She is 100% committed to taking action. So this is really a positive change. And in the House of Representatives, a new committee has been formed to study global warming. And the Energy and Commerce Committee is also very interested in the subject. Secondly, as you all well know, the fourth Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change just issued its report. As you know, it reflects 1,200 scientists, 40 different countries, approved by 113 nations. And this report makes it crystal clear that a scientific consensus has, in fact, been forged. The Earth is warming, and the warming is caused by human activity, namely the combustion of fossil fuels. The report also finds that global warming cannot be stopped. It can be slowed. The report leaves little cover for the deniers. They can no longer hide from these facts. So a long chapter of federal inaction is being ended, but new chapters have yet to be written, and the form they take will determine our future. So we've got to come together. We've got to find a solution, and we've got to take bold action and make the changes necessary to prevent what I believe will otherwise be real catastrophe. Now, why are we facing this problem? The simple truth is that our nation is addicted to fossil fuel. And it is the burning of these fuels, coal, oil, gasoline, even natural gas, and the greenhouse gases that they produce that's the primary cause of global warming. And here is the key. Carbon dioxide does not dissipate in the atmosphere. It stays for 5 decades that we know of, and quite possibly a lot longer. It causes the Earth's temperature to rise. This means that the carbon dioxide produced in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s is still there in the atmosphere today. And the carbon dioxide that we produce today will still be in the atmosphere in 2050 or beyond. So there will be serious consequences for our planet unless we make major changes in the consumption of fossil fuel. Leading scientists say that to stabilize the planet's climate by the end of this century, we need a 70% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions below 1990 levels. And we need that by 2050. So I believe, based on what I know now, that the goal should be to stabilize carbon dioxide at 450 parts per million by the middle of the next century. This is, in fact, an ambitious goal worldwide. And look, it's the only goal that means anything, worldwide. Not just a city, not just a state, even as big as California, but worldwide. It's the only way we solve this. If we achieve this goal, we could contain warming to 1 to 2 degrees. We would see significant changes in the world around us, but it would be possible to adapt to them. But if nothing is done, if the Earth warms 5 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit or more in the next 50 years, the face of our planet changes forever. Greenland and the western Antarctic ice sheets would melt completely. Seas could rise by 20 feet or more. Here in California, 2/3 of the Sierra Nevada snowpack would disappear. Now that's an amount equal to the entire water supply for 16 million people in the Southern California basin. Reports in the San Diego newspaper yesterday indicate that the Colorado River is already drying up, and San Diego is going to begin to receive much less water, on which it depends, from the Colorado. Worldwide, species will continue to disappear. Hurricanes will become more volatile. Malaria will spread. Scientists warn us that we may be close also to the tipping point. As a matter of fact, I spent a day with climatologists at the Scripps Institute, and they said to me, if we have erred because we have been too conservative. The tipping point beyond which we cannot return could happen sooner than they think. So failure to act, and humans will have caused the most sudden temperature shift since the dawn of civilization. But if we act soon and we act decisively, further global warming can be limited. This should be our goal. We've got to control and contain the warming. So I'm here to ask you to stand up, be counted, and join me in this effort. So the question is, what do we do? The truth is, there's no simple answer. There is no silver bullet. No one thing will turn the tide. But rather, we need answers in many different areas. More importantly, we need people of common purpose working together to find innovative solutions based on sound science. We in the United States, I believe, bear a huge responsibility for global warming. We are the 800-pound gorilla today. We are 5% of the population, and we use 25% of the energy. So we generate 25% of the problem. So what should be done? I believe the scope, again, has to be national. The goals have to be sustainable. Most cap and trade bills go up to a certain point, 2020, and they stop. That's a mistake. They have to continue on. We have to have a sustainable, ongoing regimen. And it has to be practical, which means doable. And that's why we have tried to work on a multidisciplinary legislative program, and Chris mentioned some of it to you. We've already introduced the electricity cap and trade bill, which I intend to tell you a little bit more about. The bill for industry is in the making, should be ready in a week or two. We've introduced, Senator Olympia Snowe and I and 15 co-sponsors have indicated a fuel economy standards bill. We call it 10 over 10 because it means over the next 10 years the entire fleet has to be reduced by 10 miles per gallon. Fourth, a bill to promote biofuels, biodiesel, E85, other low-carbon fuels, and an energy efficiency program modeled after California. Now, I don't believe that any of the work I've done is perfect. I believe it can all be improved. But what we have tried to do is put forward a practical, achievable, and sustainable regimen, and one that can garner support. I'll tell you what the problem getting anything done is in a minute. I have no doubt that these bills will be changed or amended, hopefully improved as the time goes on. But I think they comprise a significant starting point. There are many different programs proposed by mayors, by governors, by state legislators, by members of Congress, by senators. Some want an economy-wide bill, some want a sector-by-sector program, some want just a hard cap, some don't like cap and trade, others want strong regulations for specific activities. My belief is that tailoring global warming regulation by sector will best create a practical, achievable, and sustainable structure. So let me begin with electricity. And let me tell you why we begin with electricity. It is responsible for 1/3 of the global warming gases in our country. And 2/3 of this comes from combustion of pulverized coal. Coal alone produces 27% of the annual United States CO2 emissions, or 2.1 billion tons every year. It's a primary source of coal. Cheap coal is the primary source of power in 40 of our states. 40 times 2 is 80. That's 80 senators that are going to be very difficult to convince to do anything about coal because it's cheap and consumer-friendly in their state. So that's what we face. And despite awareness of coal's contribution to global warming, 150 new coal plants, dirty coal plants, are in development across the country as we speak. So it's critical to find ways to clean up coal or else find alternatives. I believe the best way to do this is to establish a national cap and trade program for the electricity sector, which hopefully can one day be a world program. And hopefully countries like China and India, which will soon surpass us, are able to participate in. Let me quickly describe the bill that we've introduced. And we've set the cap at 206 levels in 211. That's a 6% decrease in anticipated levels of greenhouse gases, the 6 of them, from the electric sector. In 2015, we would ratchet that cap down to 2001 levels. That's a 16% reduction from anticipated levels. Then in 16, 17, 18, 19, it's an additional 1% reduction, so that by 2020, emissions would be reduced in this sector 25% below anticipated levels. Now, most cap and trade programs that have been submitted in the Senate stop at 2020. Ours does not. At 2020, the EPA would take over, and the EPA would establish an independent panel of scientists and be required to continue to ratchet down those numbers 1.5% a year or more. There's a hammer in this, or more, if the science indicates that more needs to be done. That's the cap part of our bill. The trade part of the bill gives companies flexibility to embrace new technologies. It encourages innovation. It promotes green practices, not just in this area, but across the country. And one of the key elements of our bill is that it includes agriculture and forestry and allows unlimited use of low-cost farm, forest, and wetlands credit. This allows farmers, foresters, and landowners to earn additional revenue by selling credits based on the storage of carbon dioxide in the soil and in plants, by planting trees, by growing switchgrass, cellulose, those kinds of things. So emissions can be significantly reduced while air quality, wildlife habitat, and water and soil conservation are improved. I think it's a win-win. The bill will also generate billions of dollars for research and development of clean electricity-generating technologies, such as wind or solar. This funding would be raised through an EPA-conducted auction of credits, which in our bill begins with 15% auctioned in the program's first year, gradually increasing to 30% within 5 years, 45% within a decade, and eventually to 100% of credits auctioned by 2036. By 2036, we estimate that the credits would produce up to $55 billion for investment in new technology, which would be 80% would go to that, and then the remainder would go to communities affected by global warmings. Alaskan villages being flooded, fish and wildlife being made extinct by global warming, that kind of thing. So the trade part of the bill provides billions for improvement to technology. And one of the things that's so attractive to me about it is this offers a chance for us to engage the countries like India and China in the trading of these credits to be able to move internationally. Now, how have we gotten where we've gotten? Knowing that 40 states are governed by coal, knowing that I have to get some votes from somewhere, and knowing that I've got to have some industrial support, we made a conscious choice to work with a group of utilities, largely regulated utilities, called the Clean Energy Group. They include Calpine, Entergy, Exelon, Florida Power and Light, PG&E, and the Public Service Enterprise Group. These companies operate in 42 states. They supply more than 15% of the United States electricity needs. So their support became critical for me. They support this bill, and I'm hoping they will really come forward and help us push the bill, improve the bill as it proceeds along in hearing and committee consideration. Now, there are still those who deny that cap and trade can work, and I look for examples. And although it's less complicated, I refer them to the acid rain reduction program implemented in the 1980s, aimed to reduce sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide emissions. In the 16 years that this cap and trade system has been in place, sulfur dioxide emissions have been reduced by about 34%. That's 5 million tons. And nitrogen oxide by 43%. That's 3 million tons. Cap and trade here has worked, no question. Now let me touch on the transportation sector. This sector makes up approximately 28% of carbon dioxide emissions, better than a quarter, big sector. Passenger vehicles alone, cars, light trucks, SUVs, make up 20% of all U.S. emissions. So we've got to reduce these emissions. The good news is the technology exists to do it today, and it can be done. The bad news is that Detroit and many foreign auto manufacturers refuse to utilize these technologies to produce better fuel economy for one reason or another. So that's where our 10/10 bill comes in. We have introduced it. We have 15 co-sponsors. It is scheduled for hearing before the Commerce Committee. If passed, it would save 18% of emissions from passenger automobiles by 2025, or 350 metric tons of CO2. It's the equivalent of taking 60 million cars off the road in 1 year. It would also save 2.1 million barrels of oil per day by 2025. That's nearly the amount that we import today from the Persian Gulf. So if fuel economy of vehicles is accomplished, it's a major step in the right direction. The other side of the transportation coin is increasing the availability of low-carbon fuels and new clean fuel technologies. We need to encourage the use of these fuels, which produce less carbon dioxide, biodiesel, hydrogen, E85 made from cellulosic ethanol, not from corn, because the energy ratio there is inverse, but from other entities. So we will be introducing a biofuels bill that will require oil companies to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 15% by 2021 and 21% by 2030. When fully implemented, it would prevent 627 million metric tons of CO2 from being produced. That's the equivalent of taking 108 million cars off the road. Secondly, our bill would take California's landmark tailpipe emissions law, a good law, now being challenged by automobile companies. They challenge it because it's a state, not the nation, that's enacting it. And so what we would do is make this, the California system, national, and therefore remove the threat of litigation. This would reduce carbon dioxide emissions from vehicles by 30%, and here's the good part, by 2016. So it's a big, big deal if we can do it. Now, energy efficiency. This is the last bill. Actual energy usage in our state has remained stable over the last 20 years, believe it or not. We use 6,700, this is something you need to know, 6,700 kilowatt hours per person. And you say, oh, that's so much. The national average is double that. Wyoming's is 4 times that. So what we would do is replicate the California program, again, on a national level. We would require electricity and natural gas distributors to implement energy efficiency measures to achieve significant savings by 2020. Our goal is 10% for energy distributors, 4% for natural gas distributors. This saves 343 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions by 2020, or a 9% reduction in anticipated levels. The legislation would also mandate strict energy efficiency standards for federal, commercial, and residential buildings. You know, you can build green buildings today, and we should. And we should change our building codes to be able to do that. If we do that adequately, it's 13 million metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions saved from new homes and buildings. That's a 25% reduction below projected levels. So I think you can see all of these things end up doing a great deal, although it's sector by sector. And cap and trade works for one part, but other types of regulations have to work for other parts. Now let me speak of the international picture just for a second. We currently produce the largest percentage of greenhouse gas. China, India, Europe, Russia, Japan, in that order, are not far behind. China's coal use outpaces that of the United States, the EU, and Japan combined today. And China, which is building a new coal plant every week, will soon pass the United States as the largest emitter of carbon dioxide. The bottom line is this: every nation is part of the problem, and every nation must be part of the solution. But the United States must lead. I cannot tell you, I have had ambassadors from some I have had ambassadors from the various countries I've just mentioned tell us the United States has to leave because competition, well, some might think that too, but competition is such that they're not going to do it, the big countries, unless we do it, because they believe they're still developing economies. They should have an opportunity to have refrigeration and other energy amenities in their citizens' lives. Therefore, the only way to work is internationally through a cap and trade and create those incentives to do just that. So let me conclude. 11 out of the 12 past years are the warmest on record, and 2006 was the warmest of them all. And there's every reason to expect this trend is going to continue. So here's what I ask of you. Work with leaders in other states to support immediate action on climate change. It's going to take an enormous effort because of coal and because of the uncertainty of coal sequestration and gasification as a long-term response. And the fact that so many of these companies and so many of their representatives say, if we move on this, the price of fuel is going to get raised for all of our constituents. And yet, the price of the planet is at stake. So add your voice in support of a mandatory cap-and-trade program. Help us with our 10/10 fuel economy bill, a low-carbon bill, a national energy efficiency program, and please, don't shift, whatever you do, don't shift the problem to the next generation. This is our problem to solve. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Should I stay here? Very fancy. We can't share the same microphone? I guess not.
So you can have the camera off yourself.
Oh.
I am. No, not. So we have several terrific questions and some others.
Not too Shall I say start with the others first?
So there's several about, there are a little bit about the politics here, and let me start with
Okay.
In their more candid moments, industry representatives talk of cutting a deal while the Republican is in the White House. What's the risk of a weak climate bill or set of bills being adopted, which has the effect of sapping energy and interest in bolder climate action?
Yeah, good question.
Do you think there are 60 votes in the Senate for the proposition that we really need to act now
Yes.
on climate change. And then lastly...
No, do it one by one, because I forget them. Let me just do I think there's 60 votes? Honest answer, no, today. That doesn't mean there won't be when we've got a bill there. If the bill can be supported by some in the industrial sector, if they can show that that the standards are attainable, practical, doable, that the regimen will function, I believe we can get the 60 votes we require, because the warming trend is not going to stop. And as the weather patterns become more volatile, and they will, people, I think, in this country begin to understand more and more as the weather patterns change very dramatically. The first part of the question was?
The making a deal with the Republican White House versus...
The Republican White House doesn't like cap and trade, as I understand it. I think the president wants to put something forward. You know, I don't know what it would be, so I can't say. I've heard that he's interested in working with the Environment and Public Works Committee in doing that. If that's true, that would be a very positive step. At the press conference we held in Washington on my bill, Senator Carper, who is our co-sponsor, said at the time, you know, really what we're looking for is the access ramp to get on the freeway of change. You have to get there, and you have to start. And then as science becomes more and more conclusive, and it will, and we learn more and more about the technology that we can change, then it becomes much easier to work more quickly. One of the things that concerns me most is that people let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And in this area, that's catastrophe, because we've got to get started. And we've got to put in that for the regimen, at one point, science controls it through the EPA, so that whatever changes are necessary as the years go on are made.
What factors will affect whether or not a preemption clause will be in your final bill? I've actually got several here that go to this central issue of whether there should be preemption or whether states should be.
For the environmental community, preemption is a big issue. They do not want California preempted. They want California to be able to work its own will. Well, think about that. Think about it. 50 different states, companies that do business, one company in as many as 42 states, having to do 42 different things. Long term, does that make good sense? I took the preemption clause out of my bill because I just didn't want to get into it at this stage. I think as things go on, we can talk and discuss the issues that are raised, if in fact they are, by not having a preemption clause, and handle it then. But right now, it distracts from the main mission, which is to get started and get some cap in place, get some trading system in place, get a series of bills passed for automobiles, for fuels, for all those kinds of things that need to be done.
Let me just make a plea. Let me just make a plea. Whatever you do on the preemption issue, please don't leave it up to the courts. I mean, it'll just be chaotic jump
I
ball.
thought you said attorneys are constructive people.
When they put on those black robes,
That's when you lose. I see.
Something happens. Okay, so I have several questions here that basically go to the R&D issue. For example, what do you think about the proposal to create a DARPA for energy research as proposed by the National Academy of Science? How will your bills or other bills at the federal level stimulate technological innovation to develop the needed new technologies and so forth. How much
Okay,
as an
let me just do
appropriator?
those two. I've had a lot of question about DARPA. DARPA always manages to do something that tramples on civil rights and creates a problem. So I know some of the great advances have all come from DARPA, but the bottom line is I don't have an opinion on that subject. And the second part of the question?
Well, as an appropriator, what do you think about increasing funding for R&D
Oh, absolutely. See, there's no question about that. The funding has to come from somewhere, because it can't come from fuel prices for the most part. And that's the beauty of the auction in the cap and trade, that the auctions throw off the funds for the technology.
Have you considered a fee or tax on carbon dioxide
Yes,
rather than a trading market? There's another question that talks about a carbon tax.
Yes, well, those are both together.
Right.
Most people believe that the two big alternatives out there are a carbon tax or cap and trade. That's kind of where I find in the scientific reading that I'm doing, it always comes down. Some people advocate a carbon tax as a way to drive the change, others cap and trade. I fall into the cap and trade thing largely because I don't see a carbon tax ever getting enacted in the United States. It's tough enough with cap and trade. And I'm really in a hurry to get started. I really think that getting a moderate bill passed, which can be strengthened as the weather changes and the impacts grow, it will be strengthened, becomes the most important and significant thing we can do.
How do we know if the tipping point isn't under 450 parts per million?
Chris, I'm not a scientist. I don't know the answer to that. It well could be. All I know is of the reading that I have done, this is generally the most accepted number.
Okay. I guess this is a question to elaborate a little bit on part of your remarks. If your electric sector bill only reduces emissions by 25%, I think that was through 2020.
By 2020.
20, yeah. Where will you come up with the additional 50% we need in order to stabilize our climate?
Yes. You see, what this bill does, it sends the signal. You have to make the changes. You can't sit there and wait for somebody else to change, because it says beginning in 2020, the EPA takes over, and at minimum, it's 1.5% a year. But if the scientific panel says in 2021, 1.5% is not enough, it has to be 5% a year from this point on, that's what will happen. And it will be done on the basis of science. And I think that's a very strong position to be in, because what we try to do is provide enough time for the credits, the allowances, the auctions to take place to spur the funds to move the technology. Now, having said that, there are some big companies that do know they have to change. Duke Energy, for example, and I've never been a fan of Duke because of what happened in California in the early years, but I listened to their CEO, talked with him. They have now 2 plants where they're experimenting with carbon sequestration. They're beginning to invest in it. They now recognize that cap and trade. What worries me, it's always when you get down to the details that people have disagreement, who are sort of in the community that want to do something. Just realize the community that really wants to move is still a very limited part of our society. People still don't recognize the seriousness of this. This is the great contribution of Al Gore's. I mean, he has spoken all over the world. He has written, he has done a movie. The world is really, through his efforts, on a wide civilian basis, coming to know the threat from global warming. It's an enormous contribution, in my view.
Two very quick final questions. First, there's several people who have asked about full fuel cycle carbon analysis or carbon impact analysis. And they're asking whether or not your bills will require that major government decisions include some kind of a carbon cycle analysis.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about that. Whoever the question was from, I'd be very interested in hearing the pros and cons of that. My staffer, who is also a lawyer who has worked on this, is John Watts, and you can call our office and talk with him. And I'd certainly like to know more, because I know very little about that part, so thank you.
There's one last question here. I'm not, maybe from one of your staff. It says, "Dear Senator Feinstein, thank you for being such a sterling representative of our great state. What would it take..."
Which staffer did that?
What would it take for you to become a candidate for president in 2008?
I'll answer it with 2 words: a lot.
So I should have, I made a terrible political mistake in not acknowledging the presence of and thanking the senator's husband, Dick Blum, Richard Blum, the chair of the Board of Regents, who was here.
I'll protect you, Chris. I'll protect you. Don't worry.
He's a great American. As far as I know, he did nothing to help with this conference. So, but anyway, please join me in thanking the next Vice President of the United States, Dianne.
Oh, thank you.